and welcome back to the channel. Last week I talked about toxic friendships in Jane Austen, and I was going to make a video about healthy and positive friendships in Jane Austen, but it occurred to me a lot of those are between siblings or family members, so I might make one later on that's about healthy friendships in Jane Austen that aren't sibling relationships, because I can think of a few, like Elinor Tilney and Catherine Morland, for instance. But in this video, I'm going to be talking about the best sibling relationships in Jane Austen's novels. So obviously, Jane and Elizabeth Bennet have to be on this list. They are the ultimate positive sibling relationship in Jane Austen's work. The relationships between them and the younger siblings, not so much, because, yeah, the younger girls are a little bit silly and not really on the same level as Lizzie and Jane. But between the two of them, they're very different personality-wise, with Jane being more shy and reserved, and Elizabeth being more bold and outspoken, but they have a lot in common in other ways. For example, they're both much more well-mannered and accomplished than the younger siblings in the family. They both very much desire to marry for love, and they care very much for each other and want the best for each other. I think it's very telling that when Elizabeth initially rejects Mr. Darcy, one of her reasons for that is his interference with the relationship between Jane and Mr. Bingley. She also, of course, mentions his disapproval of her family and what she believes he did to Mr. Wickham, but I think the fact that he messed around with her sister, that really makes her despise him at this point in the novel. And it's after he interferes to save her family from scandal and most likely gives Bingley a little nudge back towards Jane that the two of them eventually get together. The relationship between the Dashwood sisters, Elinor and Marianne, in Sense and Sensibility is a little bit more complicated than the relationship between the two eldest Bennet sisters. But as with Jane and Elizabeth, they're very different people who care a lot for each other. Elinor is logical and practical and very good at concealing her emotions, whereas Marianne is flighty and romantic and has absolutely no control over her emotions. And their different ways of dealing with life and loss and heartbreak form kind of the core plot of Sense and Sensibility. The narrator very heavily favors Elinor's approach to it, but hers isn't perfect either. While she is much more mature than Marianne and takes on a lot more responsibility, she also ends up suffering in silence throughout the novel when she's dealing with something that's just as bad as or worse than what Marianne is dealing with. By the end of the novel, Marianne has learned a lot from Elinor, but I think Elinor has also learned a little bit from Marianne, and they both kind of find a happy medium where they are in control of themselves and their emotions, but both allow themselves to fall in love and to seek to be with the person that they're in love with. Mansfield Park is full of messed up, complicated, unpleasant family dynamics, but the relationship between Fanny and Susan is one of the better sibling relationships in the novel. When Fanny returns home to her parents after spending a lot of time with her cousins and aunts and uncle, she is not exactly at home there anymore. It's very different from what she's used to. Even though she wasn't particularly happy at Mansfield Park, she does find that the lives of her parents and siblings are very different from her own. And she's a little bit put off by the chaos in their household and also her siblings' lack of manners and education. But while she's there, she kind of takes her younger sister Susan under her wing, and they have a very sweet relationship. And when Fanny gets her happy ending, she brings Susan along with her. And I get the feeling that because of all of the changes that take place in the novel, Susan's life at Mansfield Park would be a good deal happier than Fanny's initially was. I have two sets of siblings from Northanger Abbey. The first is Catherine and James Morland. Really, all of the many siblings in the Morland family seem to get along pretty well, but the dynamic between Catherine and James is the one that comes into the most focus because they're both in Bath at the same time and end up courting the Thorpe siblings, who are not on this list. Catherine and James are very different people. He is a lot more down-to-earth and serious, whereas she is very flighty and imaginative and tends to blow things out of proportion, but they seem to get along very well and have a lot of respect for each other. And then, also in Northanger Abbey, Eleanor and Henry Tilney. Now, the Tilney family in general is kind of messed up, and the oldest brother, Frederick, is not on this list and not a great person, but I like the dynamic between Henry and Eleanor. They're both good people in a family that, although not what Catherine suspects, does have some skeletons in the closet and some unpleasant people in it. But the two of them are very much there for each other. I think it's interesting that she seems to be helping him find someone that he can love and respect, who also has the kind of fortune that their father requires from whoever they are to get married to. I do wish that a little bit more attention had been paid to Eleanor and her love life, marriage prospects, or whatever, because the part where she randomly gets married at the end, but we don't really know who she's marrying, that does seem to come out of nowhere, and it does make their relationship seem a little bit one-sided, where she's putting a lot of time and effort into making friends with the woman that he might intend to marry, and he really doesn't show any interest in her and her potential future husbands. But overall, I do very much enjoy their dynamic. And then finally, Fitzwilliam and Georgiana Darcy. We don't meet Georgiana until well into the novel, and at that point, Lizzie has heard all kinds of unpleasant things about the Darcy family, generally through the lens of Mr. Wickham's viewpoint, and of course, he is very biased. So she's very surprised when she finds that Georgiana is not haughty and unpleasant like her brother, but actually a very sweet girl. The fact that he has such a sweet and kind younger sister who he obviously cares a great deal about is one of the first things to indicate that he actually is very different from Elizabeth's initial impression of him. So those are my favorite sibling relationships in Jane Austen's novels. Which one's your favorite? Feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays.